Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or your digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organization. Each and every episode, we sit down with leaders from various fields, just like you're grabbing a cup of coffee with them. We dive into real, practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, how do you build the mental strength needed to navigate life's toughest challenges? Whew. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a super secret level to life where we missed out on all the challenges, all the pain, all the hardship? But there isn't, and we can actually find beauty in the pain and the things we go through, but it is an amazing journey. Well, today on the Speak with People podcast, I am beyond thrilled because I get to welcome an amazing author, a psychotherapist, a college psychology professor, best-selling author of this amazing book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Do. She has 5 other books out as well. And her TEDx talk just passed 24 million views. Can't even imagine that. Just absolutely incredible. So today I kind of get to interview a hero and someone that I have learned a ton from afar. Amy, welcome to the Speak with People podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Oh, I love it. Well, hey, before we hop in, before we, dive too much into this, the questions and the conversation, we'd love if you just kind of take our listeners on a little bit of journey into your story, who you are, what you do, what got you there. The thing that I absolutely love right now is we're interviewing from your house. I'm at my house, but you're at your house, and it's a sailboat. I think this is the first podcast episode I've done.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it is. It's a bit of a non-traditional lifestyle, but I didn't start out here. I started in rural Maine, actually. That's where I grew up.
Okay.
And became a therapist. And my sister and I had adjoining offices in the middle of nowhere, Maine, where if you were going to see a therapist, basically you were stuck with one of us. So sometimes, I'd end up seeing one family member and she'd see the other one. And we have different last names. So not everybody knew that we were siblings. And then we'd get that like, wait a minute, you guys are related? And I felt kind of like Niles and Fraser Crane, right? Like on the TV show where they have their practice. But life was pretty good, but I wrote an article called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, and it went viral, like mega viral. 50 million people read it within a matter of weeks. And one of those people happened to be a literary agent who said, you should write a book. And I didn't even know like what a literary agent was. So I kind of didn't even respond to her because, as you might imagine, with 50 million people reading and sharing this article, I was getting phone calls from like MTV in Finland called and CNN in Mexico. And all of these outlets are calling to interview me because they're like, you're a therapist and clearly you wrote this article that resonated with people. And it must be because you're so mentally strong. But the truth was, at the moment that I wrote that article, I felt anything but mentally strong. When I was 23, I had lost my mom suddenly and unexpectedly. She had a brain aneurysm. And so she was fine 1 minute and then she was gone the next. And that was my first real experience with a major loss.
Oof.
And I just started my career as a therapist, but I felt incredibly ill-equipped to cope with that. And I thought, here I am teaching other people how to deal with stuff. And I don't really know how to deal with this in my life. And to see my dad by himself, they had been married since they were 18 and 19. And so now to see my dad alone, and then my dad's house caught on fire 2 weeks after my mom passed away. It was like this, I don't know, I can't even explain it, but it was a really tough time. And then on the 3-year anniversary of the day that my mom died, my 26-year-old husband died of a heart attack, which would have been my biggest nightmare in life. After losing my mom, the thought of losing somebody else, I was terrified. Like, who else might I lose? But then I would think to myself, well, statistically, I'm probably pretty good. And so the same day that my husband's saying to me, like, how do you want to honor this day? It's the day that you lost your mom. That same day, he dies of a heart attack.
Oh.
And it was the most surreal, Like, I just kept waiting to wake up from this nightmare because I thought that can't actually be the case. And at the time, he was the primary breadwinner. Therapists don't make a ton of money. We had already bought a house, and I thought, now what do I do? The last thing I want to do is to become homeless. But I have to go to
Mm.
work, and I'm supposed to help other people deal with their problems. My heart is shattered, and I don't even know which way is up and which way is down because I'm 26. My friends are getting married. They're talking about having kids. I had had all of these hopes and dreams in life, and I thought, this is not where I thought I was going to be. How do I go to work? And as a therapist, you can only work so many hours. Obviously, you can't work 110 hours, or you can't work that much overtime and still be effective. And so one of the things I had started doing was writing freelance articles because I thought, if I just don't have to move for a couple of years, if I could just keep my house, keep
Yep.
one thing the same for a few more years, maybe I'll
Yep.
be okay. And it took a long time to really work through my grief to figure out, what do I want this next chapter of my life to be like? This isn't what I signed up for, but it's not like I have a choice. So what am I going to do to make this life still the best that I can? And it took a few years, but like, I got a motorcycle and I got a motorcycle license, and I started driving around on that. I just started doing some like really kind of different things to
Yeah.
experiment. Like, what do I want life to be like? Was fortunate enough a few years later to find love again, and I got remarried, and like, I thought, oh, this is great, this next chapter of my life. And my father-in-law was diagnosed with terminal cancer not long after. And I just thought, I just spent 10 years grieving. I don't have anything left. I
Mm.
don't know that I can do this. So it was the day that we learned that his cancer had progressed and he had probably a couple of weeks left to live, that I sat down and I wrote myself a letter of what mentally strong people don't do. Because I said,
Wow.
you're going to go through this whether you want to or not. So just don't do these things and you'll be okay. And I found it helpful. So I thought, I'll put it on the internet and maybe somebody will read it. Like, I thought 10 people would read it. But that was the article that 50 million people read and ultimately changed my life. So I was able to write a book. And then even when I wrote a book, I thought, well, this is great. I'm a therapist and I wrote a book. And right out of the gate, the book didn't sell like a zillion copies or anything like that. It did okay. And then about a year and a half after it came out, I had conversations with my agent and with my publishing house, and they were like, you did all right for a therapist who wrote a book. Good job. And then Rush Limbaugh reads my article on the internet and says, you got to go buy this book.
Oh my
And he
word.
and it immediately sold out of every bookstore, and I started hitting all of these bestseller lists. And everybody's like, wow, a social worker and Rush Limbaugh is promoting your work. And now you just hit the Wall Street Journal. I was number 7 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. And suddenly it like was the tipping point that then it started, like, enough word of mouth came to be that the book just started selling and selling and selling. And now it's in 45 languages and
Jeez.
we've sold over 1 million books. And I got to write a second book. And it was about the time that we wrote the second book that my current husband said, well, we don't have to live in Maine anymore where it's cold and snowy. Do you want to do something else? So we moved to a sailboat in the Florida Keys, and now I get to write books and I have a podcast and I get to speak about mental strength on a completely different level than I did when I was in a therapy office in rural Maine.
Wow. I, I mean, I have so many questions. I mean, what a story. Oh my goodness. I can't imagine being that young and diving into that much loss. I mean, when I read your book, I was like, and I reread it over the weekend because I was like, okay, I want to make sure I'm back into this. But, even the story of your first husband, I mean, went in with back pain, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just struggling with back stuff. And then, the crazy loss of that. We'll get, I want to get to the heart of the conversation, but I know we have a lot of people listening that sometimes don't know how to deal with grief or what to say to people dealing with grief, especially they work in an office, somebody deals with something. Did you find anything helpful for you as you went through these seasons of grief that, sometimes people say the dumbest things, like they're in a better place now. And, I mean, just the weirdest, like, what are you like, really? But I'm kind of throwing you a curveball here, but anything that you learned through the process that's like, hey, if you have a friend, family, coworker going through grief, don't forget this or do this.
I'm glad you asked that because, in fact, my aunt's husband passed away not too long ago, and she said to me, I'd be okay if it weren't for the things that people say to me. because I think really well-intentioned and well-meaning
Sure.
people will say things like at least they're in a better place, they didn't suffer, or something great's going to come out of this, or something
Right.
good will come along, and none of that is good. And I hear a lot of advice where people say, "Well, at least say something." But
Mhm.
no, I don't think you always have to say something, or just say I'm sorry for
Yeah.
your loss, or say
Yeah.
I'm thinking of you.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what else to say, that's okay. In fact, as a therapist, sometimes I'll just say to people, I don't know what to say to you right
Mm.
now, but I just want you to know I hear you and I'm with you.
Yep.
Because sometimes there are no words, and I don't think we have to try to make things better. I was really fortunate that I worked for a therapy office. So my boss called me and she said, do you want us to come to the funeral, or is that weird? Like, do you want your coworkers at your funeral with your family? If that's bizarre, tell us and we won't come. If you
Yep.
think that would be okay for us to be there, we will. And I really appreciated that they
Mm.
asked me that question. I said, "Oh, by all means, come. If you're open to that, I would love to have you there." And so my boss met my dad, which isn't anything I had ever imagined would happen, but I appreciated that she asked me. And because my coworkers were therapists too, they knew, like, when I'm walking down the hall, don't just stop in between appointments and be like, "Ah, so sorry," because
Right.
that wasn't going to be helpful to me during the workday. So
Yeah.
sometimes they would come up to me after the end of the workday and just have a quick conversation. Do you need anything? And that was much more helpful. And I think when it comes to that question too of do you need anything, if somebody loses somebody and you say, like, let me know if you need anything, the other person might not come up with anything. So sometimes it's okay to just say, I sent you groceries by Instacart, or you're going to be home at 3
Yep.
p.m,
Wow.
or here's a gift card to get something to eat when you feel up to it and you don't feel like cooking but you're able to eat. Here's a gift card to Subway or something to that effect, just so that people know you're thinking about them. And then to
Yeah.
wait a little bit too, like there's the first week when somebody passes away, there's so much going on. It's about the second or the third week that everybody else's life starts to go back to normal and the person's life gets really quiet. And sometimes that's when they need somebody the most, who just sends a text message and says, just checking in on you.
Yep. Whew. Wow. Well, from an outsider perspective, uh, it seems pretty obvious to me why your initial article, why your book, why your TEDx talk, has touched so many people. I mean, the level of vulnerability and transparency that you shared. I mean, I don't know who said it. Somebody very smart, but people lean in, to vulnerability when they see it. And I just, I mean, I'll thank you at the end of the podcast as well. But thank you already for sharing your story so often, because I can see why it's just resonated with so many people. I mean, just a powerful story, and thank you for helping, so many people as they've kind of gone through that stuff. Um, as we kind of talk about this kind of idea of mental strength, you know, do you think it's harder in 2024 with the onslaught of technology? I mean, the average adult is what on their device, 23 hours a day or something like that. I can't remember the exact number. I know I
Yeah.
blew that up there, but do you think it's more difficult in 2024, or do you think it's easier? I mean, I'd love, kind of start off in that technology bent, especially where our brains are, we're so addicted to technology. Has it made it harder? Has it made it easier to be mentally strong?
I think it depends. So I think for a lot of people, it's made it harder because we don't get used to dealing with uncomfortable emotions.
Mm,
Maybe you're in line at the grocery store and you're bored, so you just look at your phone,
yep.
right? Or you're lonely, or you're kind of sad, or you're anxious. We just scroll and we do it mindlessly, and it keeps us from experiencing discomfort. And in reality, like, we're supposed to experience uncomfortable emotions. They
Yeah.
all serve a purpose. Sadness, boredom, anger, loneliness, they can all be really good for us, but technology makes it too easy to escape, at least momentarily. And it takes up so much time. My therapy clients come in and they say, I don't have time to do this, or I don't have time to work on that. And so then we'll say, well, how much time did you spend on your phone? 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. And it adds up. And people will be like, oh, it was 6 hours yesterday. So I'm like, you do have time to work on this other goal if you want. But on the
Yep.
other hand, we're also in the first time in our lives where we can pick up a device that we all have with us all the time and get free advice from experts. You can get free tips from somebody. You can work on things. You can have apps that keep track of things for you, reminders on your phone, so many things that could help us build mental strength too, if we just make that conscious choice of I'm going to use this in a way
Yeah.
that helps me to grow stronger rather than just kind of mindlessly scrolling in a way that it actually subtracts from my life.
Yep. Yep. I heard someone say, the phone or I don't know, if we call it a phone, but it's more of like a, whatever it is, a high speed computer. But it wasn't meant to be a buffet, to
Yeah.
be on it all the time, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, if we have those spare, it's such a beautiful thing. With our family, I have, Gen Zers and then Gen Alpha. And so my 20-year-old, yeah, this generation's wild because he'll send me a text and literally if I don't respond in seconds, he's sending a follow-up text. He's sending a follow-up
Yeah.
text. And me as Mr. Gen Xer, I'm like, hey man, I need some time to think. Like,
Right.
I don't know how I want to respond. I mean, that's, it's just the world that we're in. When it comes to mental strength, how do you define it? What do people need to understand about mental strength?
So it's really about the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave. And sometimes people think it's the same as resilience, but resilience is really about bouncing back from something bad that happens. And I'm a firm believer that we shouldn't just spend our whole life like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, I don't want to
Mm,
just build resilience because something bad's going to happen. But mental strength is really what lets us enjoy the good times too, so that we can
yeah.
get the most out of life. So when it comes to thinking, it's about knowing that everything you think isn't true, but that you can
Oof.
reframe the unhelpful thoughts. The emotional part, again, is knowing that, yeah, some emotions are really uncomfortable, but I can handle it. And I also have the ability to control a lot of my emotions. You can take charge of it. You don't have to just listen to your feelings. Like if you only worked out when you felt like it, nobody would ever work out. So you're in charge. And then the emotion, and then the behavioral part is saying, yeah, I'm going to do things that are hard, things I don't want to do, things that are good for me in the long run, but I don't want to do it right now, but I'm going to do it anyway. And when you
Mm.
combine those three things, you have mental strength.
Whew, boy, that's so powerful. There's, I mean, you just hit on it, but there's some things we need to do in life that we just want to avoid like crazy. How do we get to the place where we can, kind of change the thinking to go, what, I'm going to stop avoiding. I'll put down the phone and I'll make sure I work out, or I'll, stop avoiding the hard conversation and I'll, have the hard conversation. Is there something or a pattern or, something we can tell ourselves that we can kind of break through, some of that avoidance?
Yeah, so anxiety and avoidance go hand in hand. We obviously do anything that's going to be anxiety provoking. But then in the long term, avoidance creates a lot more anxiety. And if we took anxiety disorders, it's probably the most treatable yet undertreated condition that exists. Because if you're anxious, obviously you're going to avoid therapy. So the average person waits about 10 years before they get help. But a lot of things you don't necessarily, you don't need to talk to a therapist about. You can also do some self-help work when it comes to avoiding. Even for those of us that don't have full-blown anxiety disorders, there's things we avoid. And just recognizing like what am I avoiding and
Uh-huh.
how is it making life worse? If I have a stack of bills here and I think, "Ooh, it's anxiety provoking to sit down and really look at how much money I owe." So I'm just not going to do it and I push it away for the day. Obviously that bills are going to be there tomorrow.
Yep.
So, important question to ask ourselves sometimes is do I need to solve the problem or solve how I feel about the problem?
Ooh.
When it comes to things that cause us anxiety, we often are focusing on the wrong thing. We're like, ooh, it's going to make me feel better rather than tackling that stack of bills? I'm going to scroll through my phone or watch something cool on TV tonight. Keeps the anxiety at bay, but that problem is still there and it's still there tomorrow. So I think just getting better sometimes at saying, okay, I need to tackle the problem. This is going to be anxiety provoking and I'm going to do it anyway. And life gets so much better when we get better at answering that one question: solve the problem or solve how I feel about it.
Wow, I love that. It's kind of like mental training, right? I mean, sometimes the mental training, physical training, kind of described in the same. How, I mean, you just kind of touched that with that question. Is there anything we can do daily to kind of push through that mental training to kind of say, okay, hey, this is a discipline or a habit I need to make sure that I do today, to be able to walk through it?
Yeah, I think sometimes at the end of the day, you ask yourself, What did I do today to become mentally stronger?
Mm.
And just answering that question, because sometimes when we assess our day, we're like, so and so didn't treat me very well. I didn't do very well in that conversation. I didn't manage my temper when I should have. And we have this list of things that we wish we could have done differently, or this wish list of how we thought other people should have behaved. So just answering that question sometimes makes a big difference, where you say, I did have that tough conversation, and you can't control the outcome of the conversation, but the fact that you had it.
Mm.
And when we ask ourselves that question, I think it gets us better at focusing on what we can control. Maybe I made 3 phone calls today that were tough to make. Maybe I didn't get a hold of anybody, but I still tried to make those calls. That's a step in the right direction. Or maybe I pushed myself to do that one thing that's really tough to do, or it's something I've been putting off. That's a step in the right direction. And just asking ourselves that, what did I
Mm.
do today to grow mentally stronger?
That's so good. How important is accountability, especially with our own mental strength? Like, is it critical? Is it something that every leader should have that accountability in place? Another person, a team member, what it is. But give us some of your thoughts on accountability and what that can do to help with our mental strength.
Yeah, accountability is incredibly important. Now, I know a lot of people will say stuff like, other people's opinions are none of my business. But I think other people's opinions are your business, because sometimes we need some insight so that we can get self awareness. Like, how do you come across in a meeting? You thought you were being assertive, but maybe everybody else just thought you came across not so assertive. Whether they thought you were over the top aggressive or they thought you were too passive.
Right.
So I always think it's important to get input from other people, and then to have somebody that you trust who can say, how are you doing? How are we both doing on this goal? What's your goal? What's mine? And to hold each other accountable. But there's also research of that we can hold ourselves accountable. For instance, one of my favorite studies, they ask people uh, how they were doing with their progress with going to the gym, people who had set a goal to work out more often. And they took half of that group and they said, here's a calendar, a paper calendar. Just put an X on the calendar on the days you go to the gym. And they didn't give the other half of the group any suggestions at all. The people that put the X on the calendar, their gym attendance skyrocketed, whereas the other people, it fell off. And that's the only intervention it was just a piece of paper with a check mark of holding ourselves accountable makes us do something more often. So I think sometimes we can do that too. An app on your phone, a piece of paper where you just put a check
Yep.
mark when you do something is enough to say, how am I doing and what do I want to do better tomorrow and how do I stick with it?
Boy, that's so powerful. Yeah, a lot of times people now, it's like their stories on their social media or posts have become like, "Hello world, be my accountability." I walked
Right.
today. I went to the gym. That's fun. And some people, you'll get the occasional comment like, "We don't need to know that we're on the
Right, but
treadmill."
sometimes I think just putting that out there and knowing, okay, like there's people watching, all right, I want to make sure that I'm doing a good job. Even if I don't feel like going, maybe I could inspire somebody else today. So maybe I will do that.
Yeah. So when you've sat down, I'm so curious. When you wrote that original article, was it like one of those nights where it was like everything externally faded away, and all of a sudden you found yourself in this crazy, like, writing, and then you woke up and you're like, wow, where did this come from? Or, did it come to you over time? Did it start with like 28 things mentally strong people don't do, and you whittled it down? I'm so curious how you got to
Ye
13.
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me that, like, "Did you mean to have it 13 so it would go viral?" And the answer is no, I never intended to publish it, but the day that I wrote it, I had gone to a staff meeting, and that was the only thing I had to do at work that day was one staff meeting from, 7 to 8 in the morning, so I was home by 8:15, and I remember sitting at the table thinking, "Okay, now I gotta get a hold of myself today." And it was that letter to myself, and I wrote it in a
Oof.
matter of minutes, but it had been brewing in the back of my
That's
mind for
right.
years. As a
Yep.
therapist, when I would see other people come into my therapy office and people were struggling with something, and yet they still had optimism and they were still hopeful and they were still like looking forward to the future. And here they were in therapy, which meant they had shown up saying, I want to work on this or I want my life to be better. And I thought, like what separates these people from everyone else? Some of these people had been through like incredible tragedy. Sometimes it was one thing after another. And yet here they were still saying, I want to be a better person. I want to make my
Wow.
life better. And as a social worker, I had been trained like, make sure you focus on what people are doing well. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. I'll tell you what your strengths are. But at some point, I realized if I went to the gym and a trainer told me to run on the treadmill and lift weights, that's great. I'll keep doing that. But I'd be really mad if they didn't tell me that my diet were sabotaging all my efforts in the gym, right? I'd rather not eat an extra jelly donut than have to run 3 more hours on the treadmill. And I thought, if people come into my therapy office with a bad habit and I ignore it and say, but you're doing these other three things great, well, that counterproductive bad habit is probably going to outweigh everything else. So
Yep.
I had figured out, like, yeah, people that just don't have certain bad habits do better in life. And it was something I had learned, but had just never put on this list. And then when I was at the bottom of the barrel and I needed a list, the last thing I wanted was a list of what to do, because I thought I got a lot to do today. But if I just don't do these things today, I'll get through it.
Oof.
And that was it. It was a piece of notebook paper with that list on it. And I just like, okay, don't do this today and you'll be okay. And then about day 3, I thought, all right, this is helping. And that's when I put it on the internet. But it didn't even have my backstory when I posted it on the internet. And
Wow.
the literary agent who called me, she's still my agent to this day, and she said, yeah, you should write a book. I wasn't going to share the backstory. I was like, oh no, I'm a therapist, I don't really share my story. And so it wasn't until like a few weeks later my friends were like, you should probably tell the backstory, that you didn't just come by this list because you're a therapist, but you came by it because you needed it too.
Wow. Are there any of the 13 that for you, were tougher than others? For you, were bigger hurdles, personally that were like, oof, this one is ridiculously hard.
Yeah, and you can see fairly well by the list, like the order that it was in. That's what I was struggling with the most. So, number one on the list is don't feel sorry for yourself.
Oh,
And that is exactly where I was. I thought, I lost my mom, I lost my husband, I'm about to lose my father in law. Like, this isn't fair. Why do I have to keep losing these people?
yep.
And it's all true. Like, yeah, that life isn't fair, and I didn't want to lose somebody else, but and that was sad, and needed to grieve, but I didn't need to exaggerate that my life was worse than everybody else's, or that I was hopeless and helpless.
Right.
So that was number 1 on the list. And number 2 is don't give away your power, which is something I definitely struggled with then, and something I still battle to this day, where I'm tempted to blame somebody else for ruining my day, stealing my time, wasting my energy, or making me feel bad. Like, no, none of that's true. I'm a therapist and I can verbalize these things to other people easily, but on the inside, sometimes I'm still like, want to blame somebody for dragging me down or holding me back. And I think, nope, that's all me. If my
Yep.
life isn't going the way I want to, I'm in charge of making change. And
Wow.
sometimes I'd rather blame other people if I'm having a bad day or something's going wrong, but ultimately it's up to me.
Wow. Wow. Absolutely. Well, as you've counseled people throughout the years in your therapy office, is there one of the 13 that seems to pop up the most? Are those the first two pretty consistent with, across the board with people, or is it just that's too tough to answer because they're kind of all over the place?
It's a bit of a variety, but I think one of the biggest hurdles these days is that mentally strong people don't expect immediate results. And I can't tell you how many people walk into the therapy office and they're like, nope, therapy doesn't work. I've been here for
Yep.
3 weeks and my life hasn't changed. Or even if they get put on medication. And
Yep.
I know when we're in pain, we want relief as fast as we can get it. But sometimes it took us 20 years to get to a really bad place, and it's going to take more than a couple weeks of a medication and a couple weeks of therapy or a few self-help things that we might try before we dig ourselves back out, or we change a lot of our habits, or we start to see ourselves differently than we did. We have these really deeply ingrained beliefs, and to really let go of those and to undo them takes a long time and a lot of practice. So I think that's one of the biggest hurdles, is people want to give up quickly. And just part of that's our world today, right? You
Yep.
order something on Amazon and boom, it's on your doorstep. And we want everything to be fast. And we think, well, I don't have time for this. But
Yep.
it's not like there's ever a convenient time to work on your mental health or build mental strength. And the best time to do it is now, not down the road when you feel like you don't have the strength to even make any changes at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. And it is interesting kind of, I think from a sociological point of view, looking at how the world has changed that way. I mean, just 100 years ago, what did I read the other day? We get more information in a day than somebody would have got in multiple lifetimes. I mean, it's just incredible how fast, things are going.
Right.
And you wonder at some point, can our brain handle all of that? I mean, the amazing amount of scrolling and articles and videos and I can't remember how much it was, but how many negative images we see, negative stories, all that kind of stuff. It's like, wow, can our brains actually function? Should every human being do some type of detox weekly? For their social media, for their screens, all of that kind of stuff. It definitely is an interesting time.
It really is, isn't it? And I do think a detox, nobody's ever said my life got worse because I took a break from social media. At least I've never met anybody who said that.
I haven't either. Yeah, I haven't either. That's incredible. Yeah, the immediate results. I mean, that's we hear that all the time, especially a lot of the trainings I do. We try to. I'm with financial advisors a lot. They tend to be maybe my age, which I'm about 50, and so we kind of get set in our ways, right? And we're like, why do I need to change the way I communicate? Like I've been doing it for 50 years, but we don't
Right.
realize, hey, there's maybe we're putting up some barriers, or we're pushing people away with our communication, and we want it to change overnight. And it's like, nope, just take some time. Just take some time. Be able to do this. You said something earlier. It struck me. Especially when you're going through hardships, you're going through different seasons of life. Is there a thing that's toxic positivity? The person that like everything bad is happening to, and they're like, everything's fine, everything's fine, it's all fine, it's gonna be good. Talk to us about that for a second.
Oh, yeah, there is. And so many people will I think there's like a lot of pressure these days. So when you go through something bad, like the next day somebody bounces up and they're like, "No, I'm good. Like nothing, I'm unscathed. That didn't bother me at all." Almost like that's a badge of honor.
Right.
Or they're going through something awful and they're just like, "Oh, it'll be okay. I'm not really concerned about it." And you're like, "No, your house is on fire. Like everything is going wrong. Like it's okay to be worried right now."
Yep.
But I see so many people that feel the pressure to not do that, or they are afraid that if they were to say call a friend and say I'm struggling right now, they're like, I don't want to be negative, so I don't want to bring my friend down. But on the other hand, when you call your friend and all you talk about is how amazing your life is, your friend probably is struggling with something too and they can't relate to you. Yet for so many of us, it's just deeply ingrained in us that like to be a tough person is all about making sure that we deny any discomfort or uncomfortable emotions at all. And then we minimize it too, and sometimes we do this to other people, like, somebody's like, "Oh, I didn't get that job I wanted," and we're quick to be like, "Well, something else will come along."
Right.
But, like, no, the person's sad or they're disappointed, like,
Yep.
sit with them in the disappointment, and that's sometimes what people really need is to know,
Yep.
like, "Yep, I've been there, this is disappointing, and I'm sorry that you're going through this," and to have that conversation, not just gloss over it and minimize it because when we pretend like nothing bad happens in life, like we don't even enjoy the good times. And there's research behind this too. Like you will enjoy a cold glass of lemonade or a cold beer much more after you mow the lawn
Yep.
because you've done some hard work. And so when you have the contrast between like something amazing and something that was difficult, the good things feel that much better. But when we pretend the bad things aren't bad, the good things also don't seem that good.
Wow. Just amazing. What's something I know you've given us lots of practical stuff so far, but somebody listening who's going, okay, I've got to make a step tomorrow towards becoming mentally stronger. Is there a step? Is there some advice you'd give them as they kind of start this journey?
Yeah, I'll give you two simple things that can be a good place to start. The first one is just name how you feel.
Mm,
And I'll give speaking engagements where I talk to executives and I'll say, I'll give you 30 seconds, write down as many feeling words as you can. And for the first about 10 seconds, they're pen and paper and they're flying through it and then they get stuck, right? Because the truth is, we don't have a lot of feeling words. Once you get past mad, sad, happy, angry, we start to run out of feeling words. And there's so many conversations these days about emotional intelligence and like, oh,
mm,
you have to guess how somebody else is feeling. I say, no, let's not guess how other people are feeling. Let's just focus on how you feel right now.
wow.
And there's research that will show if you can name your emotion, then it takes a lot of the sting out of it. So if you can say, I feel kind of anxious today, I'm feeling kind of sad, that you'll feel a little less anxious or a little less sad. So a good strategy is to uh, go to the internet and Google a list of feeling words that you can print it out, hang it on your bathroom mirror. When you're brushing your teeth in the morning and then you're brushing your teeth again at night, just say, how do I feel today?
Mm.
And you get more used to just recognizing and naming your emotions, which is incredibly powerful. It increases our vocabulary, helps us get a little more used to it. So that'd be step one, is to name how you're feeling. But then step number two is to say, is what I'm feeling right now my friend or my enemy?
Ooh.
Because a lot of people are like, ooh, that's a negative emotion. But I would argue that there's no negative emotions. Any emotion has the power to be helpful or hurtful, or your friend or your enemy at any given moment. So let's say you wake up tomorrow and you feel kind of sad. Don't ask your boss for a raise that day. There's a lot of research that shows when you are sad, the last thing you want to do is negotiate. You'll be a terrible negotiator. If you wake up tomorrow and you're anxious, it might be about something completely different. You might be worried about your great aunt who said she has a health issue. But you go to work and you're anxious, and your boss says, hey, I have this great new project for you to do. What do you think? You're much more likely to say, no, I don't think so, because our anxiety spills over from one area of our lives to another, and we don't even recognize it. And even the emotions that people will say are positive, like excitement. Let's say you're super excited because you have a vacation coming up in 2 weeks. Somebody approaches you with this get rich quick scheme and they're like, you can't lose. Well, you're so excited about your vacation that it kind of spills over into this get rich quick scheme. And you're like, you're right. There is no downside. And so it's important to just check in with ourselves. Like, what am I feeling today? Name it. And then say, is this my friend or my enemy? And on those days when our emotions aren't serving us well, you're really anxious, but yet you have to show up to this sales meeting. Like, what can you do to manage your emotions? Again, we all have choices and options. It might be, I'm going to listen to some really happy music for a few minutes before I walk into that meeting. Or I have a file in my desk drawer about funny stuff, and I'm just going to read through a couple of funny things for a minute to get me in the right mindset so I can shift my emotions. And I think when we start to take more control over our feelings, we start to get more aware of them and how they
Wow.
affect us. We just become so much more effective in absolutely everything we do. And I don't know why they don't teach us about this stuff when we're kids. Like, why don't we talk more about feelings and how your feelings affect you? I think it would change so many people's lives.
Yep. Goodness, that's so powerful. So powerful. Thank you so much. Before we kind of turn the corner and finish, love to ask you some rapid fire questions. Before I do, though, I would love to know, do you miss the snow from Maine? Do you like not having the snow in Florida?
So at Christmas time, I do. In fact,
Yes.
sometimes I went back for Christmas. I think last year, I don't always go to Maine, but I went back to Maine for Christmas, and it's like a completely different universe. You know, when there's snow and there's Christmas lights and things like that, compared to
Yep.
down here where there's palm trees.
Yep.
But for the most part, I don't miss driving in it or
Yeah.
shoveling it.
For sure, for sure. Okay, a couple rapid fire questions. We're building an online communication skills library for our listeners. So every single guest, we ask them these questions. We fill this document with them so people can go get inspired, find out some new people. But we talk about a lot about speaking. We interview a lot of speakers on the podcast. Do you have a favorite? Is there somebody who every time you hear them, you just think, oh my goodness, the world needs to hear them more often?
I love John Acuff. He's
Mm.
funny and he's got some amazing advice, but he makes it entertaining. And I think he does an amazing job.
Is there, if you're a podcast listener, is there a guilty pleasure or a development podcast that you just find yourself coming back to? You send, you make sure other people know about it.
So I do listen to some true crime, but my go-to podcast is the James Altucher Show. He asks the awkward questions that I think a lot of people won't ask. He is a great interviewer, but also his solo episodes. He's full of so many amazing ideas that I just love to listen to his show.
Oh, I love it. And is there a book? You're heading out on a sailboat journey, and unfortunately, you get stuck on a desert island. You brought one book. What should that book be?
I would say anything by Mark Goulston. He's a psychiatrist who writes a lot about communication, and I think he's got one called Just Listen, but he's got another one called Talking to Crazy, and it will improve your communication skills. Both of them will, just by reading them.
I love it. That's incredible. I love it. So I've had many TEDx speakers on the podcast. All of them combined wouldn't come close with the views that you've had. Any advice you'd give people who are, wanting to be TEDx speakers in the future, from what you've experienced with your journey?
I think it's about, absolutely share your story, come up with some. It's the hardest part, I think, about giving a TEDx talk is fitting it into 15 minutes.
Right.
And so, come up with your talking points, practice it a bazillion times, and just figure out how do you weave some stories in there too, so that you're getting your message across, but that it makes an emotional impact as well.
Oh, I love it. Where can we send our listeners to find out more about you and see all the resources that you provide?
So my website is called Amy Morin, LCSW is in licensed clinical social worker.com. And you can find information on all six of my books, as well as my podcast, which is called Mentally Stronger with therapist Amy Morin.
Amazing. Amazing. We're going to put that in our Facebook group and all of our socials, and we'll make sure we tell our listeners where they can find all of your books. Amy, I can't thank you enough. This has been absolutely brilliant. You are just incredible. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for your wisdom. You just open it up and share it so freely. Really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. Thank you for leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And thank you for every like and every comment. Every single time you cut and copy a link and send it to a coworker or a friend, it absolutely means the world, and it helps each other transform our communication skills. Lastly, don't forget about a great resource that's available to you: our communication skills library. At the end of every episode, we ask each guest their favorite speaker, their favorite podcast, their favorite book, and we've compiled all of those resources together to give you an amazing library to continue your growth and development. Thank you again for being a listener and for being a part of the Speak with People community.